That if we get this bit wrong, everything else on this board is a complete waste of time. Establishing what the return of investment is from the executive's perspective, and then establishing what we're trying to achieve and how success will be measured. By doing that, the key steps we're going to define are what HR ratios we want to measure, what cost-space ratios need to be measured, things like utilisation, cost per employee, cost per workstation, how we're going to engage with the staff. So is that via surveys, through one-to-one meetings, how are we going to measure their productivity, how is the business performance going to be measured and related back to this? Establishing where our data baseline is, and then understanding whether we're staying local or whether we're going to go global with it. So the barriers we've identified, how do you prove your benchmarking? It's very easy to do all of this at the outset, but it's completely irrelevant unless we can come back at the end of the project and demonstrate that we've added some value. The cost of capturing that data can sometimes be seen as senior execs don't necessarily want to buy into. Readjusting the bearing. Now we've set up here the importance of setting that bearing. That constantly moves. The goalposts of the project are always moving. The solutions we've come up with, occupier satisfaction surveys, whether that be through interviews, workshops, online tools, actually looking at occupancy, so whether that be space or activity, continuously validating the measuring, so making sure that this goes on and on. So doing the observation and then measuring.
Measure twice, cut once. What we also wanted to do was be a little bit of a saboteur and say, we measure there, we also need to measure again there, and just in case, we're going to measure some more there, and we measure again.
We emphasized return on environment, return on emotions, and return on expense. One key step is to make the intangible tangible.
Barriers, of course. Human behavior, fear, silos, multi-economic, geo-cultural, all that kind of barrier have to be taken into consideration when you are building your business case. Insufficient data could be a risk. Communication coming anyway on each steps for the barrier and challenges or for the solution. Communication is everywhere anyway. You know, have a visionary message on your business case. It's one of the big challenges too, of course. And be able to ask why, how, and what all the time. When you have written something on it, you need to ask these three questions all the time. Involvement, change, measure the solution, develop a consistency with a cultural process.
Really would emphasize it's not a workplace story, it's a business story.
So we didn't really agree where this program actually, how it fitted to this before, because was the product defined here in a kind of change management and implementation, or was this developing? And we think that change management and developing is the same thing. You can't change people's way of believing, but you can engage them to do research and discover the future. Well, define the key steps, collect evidence, and develop the story. Develop the story you made, maybe integrated in everyone's daily experience. Should we have different stories for different people in the organization, or should it be one story that gives meaning to the whole organization? That can we engage the top management to be discussing the business case? When it comes to the barriers, we talked about the difficulty of engaging the middle management. Also talk about cultural differences. It could be countries, and it could be different parts of the organization, of course.
The primary driver was recognizing that you were dealing with different audiences, and those different audiences needed to be engaged in different ways with different messages, and that ultimately the lion's share of the issue in moving forward, particularly if you're dealing with large organizations, is about going out of the areas that you've originally used to develop your business case, and possibly your pilots, because I reckon the pilot stage should come down this end, ahead of the program development. But fundamentally, what we needed to do was to develop a campaign to go and tune into the particular profiles of need that different leaders around the organisation had. and to build trusting relationships with those guys, making our solutions and our ideas tune in to the business need and the problems that those individuals have in order then to take that forward. If you don't engage the leaders in a division, you don't get the chance to engage too many other people. So then using that power base as a mechanism for then going in and working at different levels, again using different profiles, different arguments, different benefit dimensions to tune into different individual needs. Having absolute clarity of vision so that you can actually explain to people in very simple words what this thing is going to do for them and how.
Our subject was piloting. When we started talking about it, we realized that it was quite broad. So what makes up a pilot? Lots of different things can. So number one, defining key steps, and again, what makes a pilot? Well, the most important thing about a pilot was one that dealt with behavioral change. So it's not about walls, it's not about furniture, it's not about work practices necessarily, but it really is very much embedded in behavioral change. Just to relate to that, one of the biggest barriers that we did identify was the inability to change behavior. So we thought we would get further than we could. We thought they would buy into something. We thought we were on the right track, but that culture is actually stronger than we anticipated, and so that can be a great barrier. Lack of connection and validation with global locations. We thought this would be great to do in our headquarters, but whoops, what about the rest of the world? It's great to have a communications team. It's great to have a great design team. It's great to hire someone outside to do change management, but unless you actually find that right level of influencers within the organization who can sort of do the dirty work and who can build a kind of confidence that potentially an outside change manager can't do.
We did have a debate about whether we need a pilot at all. The cleverness here is where we've used the network to connect into the BMS. We've linked it also into our own devices, our own Outlook. Life is going to move very fast, the network will make a difference. But piloting it is a global pilot across the world. It's a very expensive pilot because in reality we're trying to take a building that doesn't belong to us and connect it into the Cisco network. And another sort of pilot is where you are looking to, if you take, for example, engineers who are used to 2-meter wide desks, and you really want to get more out of it by getting that behavior to alter, it can be quite difficult. And I would say a pilot is quite helpful if you can do, for example, the whole floor where you've done it and establish that, in fact, collaborative working does work, and you feel the buzz of the space. I think you then can sell it out to other parts. And so pilots are worth doing, and you need to be disciplined about it and get buy-in.
Okay, full integration, and I think that was one of the things that we really emphasised in the start. We realised that there were many parts of a business that we need to make sure are fully integrated into our solution, and so we started off with that in terms of saying, yeah, it's not just about real estate and FM and IT and HR, but it's also about finance, about marketing and the brand and PR. It's about all, and making sure that these are all sort of connected. And interestingly, we then came back to the fact that, of course, one of the key things is to make sure that we do have clear and measurable goals and objectives, and that that what we're actually defining in the steps actually harks back to that. In terms of barriers, some of the key things that we found, and some of these things have been mentioned already, are the silos of different parts of a business or organisation, the lack of decisions that can happen when you haven't got a steering group, and that was obviously one of our sort of clear solutions to we required.
What really came out from a large chunk of this is, as others have already mentioned, it's around communication, it's around engagement, and what we were beginning to see across this is simply how we manage that across a program of full integration when it's crossing the whole business. And as others have already mentioned, how do you make that into a business change program rather than a workplace change program? So that was then looking at getting a common agenda, making sure that we have senior sponsorship, that there is a clear alignment on the objectives, making sure that we've got exemplars, case studies, So what we begin to see from this point, I think, is that it starts to have resonance with some of the other themes through some of the other sections. So there's some real key things that crop out of this, I think.
One of the other aspects was things like using good examples and not shying away from historic failure. So if something in your pilot hasn't worked, don't shy away from it, develop it on and sort of work with it. I think another example that our table talked about was, yes, you've got a fantastic CEO, you've got a champion as a leader. What happens through a project when they then go and you lose your champion? And we were sort of saying that one of the solutions to that is actually have a steering group that has the same objectives through. So if your leadership goes, the organisation still has those clear objectives to sort of follow through, and the project therefore doesn't fail.
So I'm really glad that there's been so much thought and effort put in before, because all of that has to be used about scaling up and going global. We talked about the piloting piece and about developing the right strategies and integration and getting all those executive sponsorships. We found 3 elements which came through strongly on all of them. So we went through environmental impact, getting executive sponsorship is the primary one, and then all the economic benefits to make sure you do your 3 E's. When going global, you need to understand what global is for your business. It may only be 60% of the global portfolio, it may be everywhere. So define the market strategy that you want to go after. Then identify the internal structures and skill sets within your own corporate real estate team. Look at the key stakeholders, influencers and enablers. So then we went into the identifying the barriers, time zones, cultural differences, language, all of those are really important things. If you're going to go global, you need to understand as a company what is going to be your chosen language, and then be cognizant of people where, say for example for Microsoft it's English, but when I'm speaking across 69 different countries in EMEA, I have to be very, very, very careful when I know that I'm talking to people who English is sometimes their second language, sometimes their third language. So my communication, my message has to be very clear, very simple, and very just not complicated at all. Then we need to look at the different legislations and local standards, not just in health and safety, but also in legal and all the different entities and all the financial controls that we have within the different countries that you want to go into. Then we look at the potential and risks of how do you want to develop your partner solution. If you're looking at single source partnering, what are the risks that are going to be involved with that going global? You need to look at their key strengths and see if they're actually going to meet the level that you expect, your expectations. Are they best in class in that country? The likelihood is probably not. And you need to understand where you want to supplement it elsewhere.
On that subject of kind of local teams, we recognised in the barriers that there are potential risks with going with a sort of single source provider. You know, not always necessarily the ideal scenario, and therefore you need to find good local strategic partners on all kinds of levels to help you to implement, because that is usually a very significant risk with a global program. They can often fail locally. So, you know, you need to have some kind of framework with local partners. And the big challenges in implementing global strategies is having consistent measures, consistent data. What you often find in rolling out global strategies is a certain degree of kind of local resistance, because it's not made clear to the people locally what the measurable benefits are of the program. So that's one of the key quick wins, let's say. What is the purpose of implementing these kind of strategies in the first place? Often it's about getting more efficiency and, you know, effectiveness out of a portfolio, trying to really drive the real estate harder.
Whatever workplace strategy you have in place, it is not static. Neither is your company, neither is the technology, neither is the economy. You also have to look at your measurements, decide what it is that you're measuring, how you're going to measure it, where you're going to measure it, and the output. Is it different for presenting back to the different business units or the different needs, if it's finance, if it's HR, if it's your business unit? You have to be very, very clear what it is that you're measuring and how you do it.
And transforming organizations are really about transforming the way people behave. And we need to actually train managers how to manage remote teams. We need to train leaders how to lead by example. Embracing change is something that the organization is demanding